Henry Nowak, Iryna Zarutska, Liana K. Do you know these names? I don't think so. And that silence? That's exactly what this video is about. Today I'm going to say something uncomfortable. Something a lot of people don't want to hear. But it needs to be said, clearly, directly, and without apology. Do you remember George Floyd? Of course you do. The entire world remembers. Cities burned, millions took to the streets, black, white, young, old. Politicians and professional athletes took the knee. Corporations went dark on Instagram. Black Lives Matter echoed through every major city in the Western world for months. Now tell me, when did you last protest for Henry Nowak? When did you last see his face on the news? When did a politician or a professional athlete kneel for him? Silence. That silence is not neutral. That silence is a message. Henry Nowak was a young man stabbed to death in England. Iryna Zarutska and Liana K, victims of brutal violence in Europe. And in the UK and Germany, when incidents like these happen, you won't even hear the victims' names most of the times in the press. You'll just hear the city, Southport, Manchester, Aschaffenburg, Solingen, as if the victims were nothing more than map coordinates for an inconvenient event. This is not an accident. This is a pattern. Think back to the height of the Me Too movement. Accusations were enough. No trial, no evidence, no due process. Men lost careers, reputations, and livelihoods based on claims alone. The loudest voices in media and politics were immediately there, fast, furious, and completely certain of guilt. Or think about the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case. How the entire media ecosystem initially framed Depp as the abuser, how that narrative was cemented before a single court had ruled. How every progressive institution lined up behind the Believe All Women banner regardless of evidence. Now ask yourself, where are those same voices when an innocent white man is stabbed in the street? Where is the wall-to-wall coverage? Where are the protest marches? Where are the celebrity statements? You already know the answer. This is not an opinion, it's an observable fact, and it points to something deeply troubling. Justice in our current system is not applied equally. It follows a political script, and who gets to be a sympathetic victim is decided not by what happened to them, but by their identity. Look at South Africa. For years, white farmers have been murdered in acts of extraordinary brutality, thousands of them, systematic, targeted violence. Where is the international outrage? Where are the hashtags? Where are the CNN specials? Look at the wave of anti-Semitic attacks surging across Europe and America. Brief mentions quickly forgotten. The murder of thousands of Christians all over the world, silence. Some victims, it seems, are simply worth less in the attention economy of the modern West. Now let's talk about what happens institutionally, because this goes beyond media bias. In the United Kingdom, police have received explicit instructions from the top. Anything categorized as a hate crime or racism is the highest priority. It must be treated as true. It cannot be questioned. Officers who push back risk their careers. That sounds like it's designed to protect victims. It is doing the opposite. Because what happens when the perpetrator knows this? When they know that invoking racism is the fastest way to derail any investigation? They use it. Not because racism occurred, but because it works. The system has handed them a shield and they know exactly how to use it. We saw this play out in the case of Henry Nowak. The attacker used the system, and the system complied. In the United States, the situation has reached absurdity. We have watched on camera groups of people walk into retail stores and clean out the shelves openly in daylight with staff watching. And almost no one intervenes. Not because they can't, but because store owners, managers and bystanders are terrified. Terrified of being called racist, terrified of losing their jobs, terrified of the online mob. The result is functional impunity for certain groups. Not because the law grants it, but because social fear has overridden the law. Now imagine the reverse. Imagine white people systematically looting stores across American cities on camera with no consequences. How long before the National Guard is called? How long before it becomes the defining news story of the decade? We all know the answer. I want to take a step back and get philosophical, because I think the roots of this problem run deeper than media bias or police policy. Karl Popper, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, gave us the paradox of tolerance. An open society must be intolerant of intolerance. Racist ideologies cannot be protected because they seek to destroy equality. It's a seductive argument, and it contains a critical flaw. Popper's framework assumes that all people and all cultures are fundamentally the same, and that any observable difference is the product of oppression. Question that assumption and you are immediately branded a racist. But that isn't true, and pretending it doesn't make it so. Human beings are different. Cultures are different. They carry different values, different ethical frameworks, different ideas about family, authority, community, and law. None is better or worse. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a judgment. It's simple reality. The moment we deny that, we don't achieve equality. We enforce conformity. We insist that there is one correct way to live. The progressive Western way with its DEI and inclusion up to the point of self-destruction. Ironically, is its own form of cultural imperialism. And here's the real paradox. The system that claims to create equality is manufacturing hierarchy. There are now officially preferred victim groups and preferred perpetrator groups. There is suffering that generates global outrage and suffering that gets a free line mention in the local newspaper. Look at university admissions in the United States. After decades of affirmative action, white men statistically face the steepest climb, not because they are less capable, but because they tick every box that the system has decided to penalize. The same dynamic plays out in Hollywood, in newsrooms, in corporate hiring. That's not equality. That's a new hierarchy with different winners and losers. And it produces something dangerous. Entitlement on one side and silent, festering resentment on the other. That combination has never ended well in history. Let me be direct. The 20th century's great experiment in forced equality was communism. Level everyone, erase difference, build a uniform society. The result? Over 100 million dead. I'm not saying the Western is becoming communist, but I'm saying this. The compulsive leveling of human difference, the enforcement of ideological conformity, the assignment of guilt and innocence by group identity rather than individual action, these tendencies do not produce justice. They produce resentment, fragmentation, and eventually violence. And we are watching it happen in real time. When a white European is murdered and the media is silent, that is not neutrality. That is a message, a clear one. Your life counts for less. When that becomes normalized, when people absorb the lesson that some victims deserve outrage and others deserve silence, you have hollowed out the very foundation of a civilized society. The principle that every human life carries equal dignity. That principle is not a left-wing or a right-wing idea. It predates all of our current political categories. And if we lose it, we lose everything. So what do we actually do? First, say the names. Henry Nowak, Iryna Zarutska, Liana K. Say them out loud. Give them faces. Give them dignity. Refuse to let them be erased. Second, apply the standard consistently. Every time you see a wave of media outrage, ask yourself, would the coverage look the same if the identities were reversed? If the answer is no, then you are watching political theater, not journalism, and you should say so. Third, defend the principle, not the group. The goal is not to argue that white lives matter more. The goal is to insist that the principle holds without exception. Every innocent life has equal value. Full stop. No hierarchy, no asterisks. Because the moment human dignity becomes a political currency, something granted or withheld based on identity, we have crossed a line we cannot easily walk back from. This is not a fringe concern. This is not extremism. This is the most basic moral question a society can face. I want your thoughts in the comments, especially the uncomfortable ones. That's exactly where the real conversation starts. Share this video if you think these things need to be said and spoken out loud. Thanks for watching.